Good evening. Awesome. Welcome to our second summer concert series. Please enjoy the Billboard. For band. He is primarily remembered for the trio of the march, which you just heard. Clore did not think much of the march at first, but conceded that it was a success after the royalties paid for his home in Cincinnati. That trio theme was heard everywhere, accompanying everything from circus parades to stand-up comedian entrances. Flight to the Phoenix started as an idea for a jazz waltz. Think of It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year, which is heard after a fanfare-style introduction.
It's the most wonderful time of the year. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dum, ba-da-dum, bum-bum. The jazz waltz.
Thank you, Dave. In addition to the opening fanfare introduction, a slower andante section common to band overtures was added. The piece keeps some of its jazz flavor through the use of jazz harmonies and some jazz-sounding melodic figures in the tenor saxophone and other instruments. The title comes from the composer's stepdaughter's first trip on her own visit to family in Phoenix, Arizona, also on her first time on an airplane. The excitement and energy can be heard throughout the piece in the sweeping melody in the French horns and the saxophones, flourishes in the woodwinds, and an active percussion section, and a wild free-for-all in the brasses near the end. Here is Flight to Phoenix. I don't know who's more worn out, Dave or the players. Dean David, the composer, is a native of Wisconsin and has taught instrumental music in Montana and Wisconsin. Davis is a 1989 graduate of Lawrence University in Appleton and is currently a member of the Oshkosh Area Community Band. Dean Davis being a nom de plume of Dave Kep. David? Our next number is the Sloop John B. And you ask, why would a calypso song from the Bahamas make it into a concert saluting America? This song was included in Carl Sandburg's 1927 collection of the American Song Bag. The culture of the islands is a mixture of African, British, and American due to its historical family ties, migration of freed slaves from the United States to the Bahamas, and as the dominant country in the region and source of most tourists. As for the song, the most popular version for many of us was when the Beach Boys, the most American of bands, recorded a folk rock adaptation that was produced and arranged by Brian Wilson. The record peaked at number 3 in the US in 1966 and remains one of the group's biggest hits. Here's our rendition of The Sloop John B. The Sloop John B. Next, we will play for you selections from The Greatest Showman, songs by Benj Pasek and Justin Paul as arranged for band by Paul Murtha. The Greatest Showman is a 2017 movie which is heavily fictionalized depiction of the life of P.T. Barnum, perhaps most famous these days for founding the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus with James Bailey. But as the movie shows, he was involved in a lot more enterprises, and Barnum had said to himself, "I am a showman by profession, and all the gilding should make nothing else of me." He was active during the time of the Civil War and visited Abraham Lincoln in the White House. This medley includes The Greatest Show, A Million Dreams, Never Enough, This Is Me, and From Now On. Here is The Greatest Showman. The Greatest Showman. If you have a chance to watch that movie, it's quite interesting. It's very colorful, lots of dancing, costumes, parades, cool stuff. The United States Naval Sea Cadet Corps is congressionally chartered, U.S. Navy-sponsored organization that serves to involve individuals in the seagoing military services, U.S. naval operations and training, community service, citizenship, and teach an understanding of discipline and teamwork. It was founded in 1958 and has around 12,000 members. Its motto is "Chart Your Course." The Naval Sea Cadet March, by Italian-born and American-raised composer Joseph Alberta, won a composition prize and is the official march of the Corps. Here is the Naval Sea Cadet March. That was the Naval Sea Cadet March. Claire Grundman was one of the most prolific and highly respected composers for band in his time. He was born in 1913 and died in 1996. The Blue and the Gray, which we will hear next, has become a staple of the band repertoire. It is a suite of tunes that were popular during the war between the states. In fact, this suite was written for the centennial observance of the American Civil War. Nearly all of the songs were composed and published during the war years of 1861 through 1865, except for the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which was written years before. The Battle Cry of Freedom, the Yellow Rose of Texas were sung, whistled, and played by the Confederates. Kingdom Coming, Tenting Tonight, and Aura Lee were sung and loved by both sides. Now enjoy The Blue and the Gray. That was the blue and the gray. Can you think of Gone with the Wind and watching all the stuff that's going on and marching? We recognize the men and women of the Naval Sea Cadets and thought of the times of our American Civil War. Let us now pause and remember those who gave their all so that we may live in freedom. Lauren Kaiser, the composer of our next piece, writes, I wrote this work on July 4th, 2008, in memory of all those brave individuals who gave their lives for our freedom, our country, and our way of life. I am honored to present an offering to those people that gave away all they could possibly give for America. We listen to Those We Remember by Lauren Kaiser. To Those We Remember by Lauren Kaiser. Now it's time to salute our veterans, those who have served and who have served in the United States Armed Forces. We thank you and acknowledge your selfless service to our country. They're going to play for us this evening the U.S. Forces Service Medley and watch the conductor. After the first vamp, he will give you a high sign and then say, those who have served in the United States Army, we invite you to stand and be acknowledged for your selfless service to our country, and I boo-booed. Oh, I'm gonna say that.
No way.
My mistake. Here we go. United States Army, please stand and be acknowledged for your selfless Those who have served in the Navy, please stand and be acknowledged. Those who have served in the United States Marines, I invite you to stand and be acknowledged. Those who have served in the United States Air Force, please rise and be acknowledged for your selfless service to our country. next see this band as our summer concert series continues on Wednesday, July 10th, right here in this beautiful auditorium. We will showcase familiar popular music of the past on Jukebox Wednesday night. We will conclude our usual summer concert series on July 24th at the beautiful Grand in downtown Oshkosh, where we will feature a children's conducting event. Our concerts always begin at 7, and you need to bring more friends. Gosh, there's never an admission, but we do rely on your generosity by taking up a donation if you are in a position to donate. There are boxes at the doors. We wish to thank Shelby Edwards, our stage manager, sitting up in the booth. Our friends who usher, our sponsors who keep the bills paid, and you, our audience, who keep us playing by giving us someone to play for. We conclude tonight's concert with John Kakava's setting for concert band of America the Beautiful.
Thank you very much. You're a delight to play for. A very nice audience here this evening. We are going to do an encore. This is a little preview of our tune for the July 4th parade. It's called Days of Glory. Also by John Kakavas.
Mr. Dave Burnt in the Oshkosh Area Community Band. So we'll see you next Thursday on Main Street in the parade. Our trailer's all fixed up and ready to roll. Or we'll see you 2 weeks from tonight, right back here. Safe travels, everyone. Good night.